transitional day because we've sort of introduced the two main topics of this course. We've introduced ASP.NET from the perspective of Razor pages and dynamic pages and all that kind of stuff. We then introduced database and database design and SQL and all that stuff. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to merge those two concepts and bring them together and start putting database stuff on web pages. And a nice way to transition into that will be to discuss your project. So first thing today, I'm going to discuss your project. Second thing today is I'm going to review the assignment that's due next week. Not this week, but next week. And then lastly, there'll be time for you to work on anything that you need to work on and catch up and so on. So today will probably be a little bit of a short lecture, just because it would be really good if we could close out all the old business, all right, all the stuff that we have done prior to this point. It would be great if we could close all that out and start kind of fresh with this next assignment. So everything's caught up, everything's graded, and so on. So let's start out by talking about the project. Yeah, that's a little transitionary music there. Or is that like your entrance music? Is that what you play whenever you enter a room, Kyle? The little clip of music that was playing? Do you have like a theme song that plays when you... It'd be cool if you did.
I have radio silence.
You do? Okay. Now, radio silence as in silence, or radio silence as in the song by Thomas Dolby from the 80s, Radio Silence?
As in my mind is thinking nothing.
Oh, okay.
I'm just coming here and then trying not to...
My daughter swears that one of her cats constantly has ska music playing in his head 24 hours a day, just because he just does crazy stuff. So, all right, let's look. Yeah, it is probably true for most cats, exactly. So let's look at the project. What is that? Is someone playing a movie next door? Is it a good movie?
Most educational movies aren't that great.
I've gone past here and seen movies so old I can't imagine they're of any educational value at this point, you know? It's like, did they even know the world was round back then, you know? I remember we had more so, I mean, I'm not going to say there were no educational movies when I was a kid, but there were. But what we had more than educational movies was film strips. I don't know if you guys had those, where it's almost like slides on film, and you would show the slide one at a time, and there would be like a cassette that you get synced up with it, and there'd be a little beep that when you'd advance to the next slide and all that. That's what we mainly had. All right. So the project, you should read this if you have not already. All right. It is due in 2 parts, and the whole class is late by about 6 months here, so you'll be deducted. I will adjust those dates. To look at the precise dates, look at the syllabus. In fact, let's go and do that now. Here, just as I was being a smart aleck and say, oh, you want to look something up, look it up in Canvas, we find that my dates are 6 months off. So maybe I should be more. Oh, no, never mind. It's not listed there. I will post when the design of the project is due, because the project is due in 2 parts. There's the design, and then there's the final version of the project. And the design will be due sometime in November, so you have a few weeks to do that. All right, so it's not like I'm going to say the design is due next week. All right. All right. For your semester project, you will create a small database-driven web application. Come up with a purpose, be creative. It doesn't have to be huge, but whatever it does, it should do it completely. All right. For example, I've had students do an online poll, all right, where they, have questions, and people can register for their site and answer the questions, and then it will show the results that 62% picked A, 38% picked B, or something like that on their poll. It doesn't have to do every possible thing that you could think of dealing with polls. All right? For example, there may not be code in there to enter a new question. Maybe you have to go and force into the database the questions and possible answers. All right? But the part of it that it does do, it should do completely. So you should be able to log on, should be able to register, log on, review the questions, answer the questions, and see the results. So you don't have to solve an entire problem, but the portion of the problem that you solve, you should solve completely, if that makes any sense. All right? If you were to do something to order goods off of a website, placing the order and putting it in the order table would be enough. You don't have to write the code to actually fill the order and look to see if there's inventory and that kind of thing. All right? So pick some functionality that's meaningful and implement it completely. I would suggest you to have fun with it. All right? That, pick something somewhat related to your hobby. a hobby that you have. People have done bulletin boards where like you can post a question and people can respond to it and then comment on it and so on. Almost like threaded discussions. People have done online polls. People have done online catalogs. Really, don't limit your thinking, but pick something that you're interested in. And again, think of something that whatever you do, you can do it completely. All right? So you don't have to solve an entire problem, but whatever aspect of a problem you address, you have to solve completely. If you were doing a teacher grade book, for example, enter assignments, enter grades, allow students to post submissions to assignments, and so on. You might not have to do everything like calculate the final grade or whatever. So whatever you pick, make sure you implement it completely, even if it's not an entire solution to a problem that you create. I hope that makes sense. As I'm saying it now, it sounds weird. Like, you don't have to do everything, but whatever you do, you should do completely. Like, well, that kind of sounds weird, but I hope I've gotten across what I mean by that. Like, the parts that you do, you should do well and do as a unit. And if you assume that some other system takes care of maybe putting the questions in the database for the poll or creating the classes for the grade book, you don't have to create the classes, but assume that the classes are already populated and then allow students to enter submissions for their assignments and the instructor to grade them. I guess that's the sort of thing that I mean. Sort of draw boundaries, draw good boundaries around your system of what your system's going to do and what it's not going to do. But the stuff it's going to do that well and do that completely. Be careful not to do something that's either too big or too small. I'm gonna recreate Amazon for my semester project. Well, it's nice that you're ambitious, but that's a little bit too much. All right. On the other hand, I'm going to keep a phone list of my friends. All right. Well, that's not that big of a deal either. That's too small. Now, any project that you have that you can think up, you should, it's possible to dial it up or scale it down. All right? Again, I mentioned grade book. It might be a lot to develop a complete grade book where you can create classes and add students to classes and do all that stuff. That would be essentially recreating Canvas. But you could take a small aspect of that and say, I'm going to do this part, I'm going to assume the database is already populated with this stuff, and I'm going to do this part of it. Entering grades, calculating the final grade, there you go. All right? If you have trouble and you're not really sure about your idea, and you think it might be in need of either scaled down or scaled up, then talk to me and we'll figure something out. The project will consist of 2 parts, design and completed project. Each part is worth 20 points, and I don't think that's accurate. I think it's 15 and 20. So I'm totally inaccurate on this. All right? In your design, do the following. Write a few paragraphs describing the purpose of your application, including a description of what goals your site will address for the user. All right, many of you have had me, many if not all of you have had me for web development. And when we design a website, one of the first things that we talk about are the goals. Like, why are we making this site? What does the user hope to get out of this site? Well, discuss those goals and define the purpose. The more specific you can define the purpose, the better off you're going to be. All right? You'll come up with an entity relationship diagram for the database. And we've spent a few times and we've done a few entity relationship diagrams, so hopefully you're clear on what's contained in those. That is worth a big part of the design. All right? And that's why I kind of talk about the database or the project now, right? Because we spent some time talking about designing databases. So hopefully that notion is fresh on your mind. Now, the database serves as the foundation of your application. An interesting phenomenon is if you look historically for an organization, the data that's required for that organization stays relatively the same. How it's used changes. For example, this college was founded in, 1960, 1961, something like that. They probably didn't have a computerized database for it back then. All right? But what records did they have? What data did they keep? Well, they kept data about students, data about professors, data about courses, data about sections, data about grades. How is that different now? All right? How is that different? What kind of data do we have now that we didn't have? And we're just talking about raw data that we have now that we didn't have back in the old days. What's the difference? Of course, well, the form that the data is in. Instead of having a bunch of filing cabinets, we now have a database. Instead of having to go to the registrar and filling out a paper registration form, you could go and register online. So the data is used in different ways, and we could get all kinds of reports that we couldn't get back in the old days, but the basic raw data remains the same. And if you study a lot of problems, that will be the case. The data that you record is relatively constant. Think of a hospital again. You have patients, doctors. You have test procedures. Now, there's different test procedures back in the old days than there are now, right? There's different treatments now. You know, we don't put leeches on people like we did back then, but we have treatments, right? So if you were developing the tables for a medical database back then, they'd be probably very similar to the procedures that you have now, right? There were medicines, there were treatments, there were tests, there are doctors, there's patients, there's hospital rooms, there's equipment that does those tests. That stuff stays constant. So therefore, designing the database is like job one in doing the design. Because if you get that right, then your project stands a good chance of working out well. If you get that wrong, then you're off on the wrong foot. It's like the proverbial house of cards, all right? With a weak foundation, anything you build on top of that weak foundation is going to be very weak. With a strong foundation, you have the chance to build something strong, and even if you make mistakes, you can correct them and move on. So develop an entity relationship diagram. A listing of what pages are going to be in your application with a description of each page and purpose. And review these requirements for the things that it should have. I'm going to tweak these requirements a little bit. Master page is kind of the old name for a layout page, so I'm going to change that to layout to use the Razor terminology. And I don't care about a sitemap. 4 other pages which each interact with the database. You'll need those. You'll need to be able to do a query based on some search criteria, be able to perform insert updates and deletes, show header and detail. Site should look professional, good coding practices, be accessible and browser compatible. And finally, it should be user-friendly, fully function, and fulfill the stated purpose. Doesn't have to be extensive, but whatever it does, it should do well. So you'll list what pages that you're going to have. Now keep in mind, if you develop a bunch of pages that do this stuff, all right, yet they don't work together to solve a problem, they don't look completed and professional, and they don't fulfill any particular purpose. You can put you can put information in, but you can't get any out. All right? Or whatever. That's only roughly half the points. So the focus isn't just doing these things that are listed here. It's doing things in a purposeful way to solve a problem, to serve some goal that people visiting your site will have. So come up, for the design, you're just going to come up with a list of stuff. All right, you don't have to actually do them. But you should have a prototype of your application's homepage and at least 2 other pages. Now, I'm giving you a lot of flexibility here. You could do the prototype simply mocked up in Word if you want to, or Photoshop, or Illustrator, or whatever. You could do it actually in HTML. You could hard code it in HTML. Remember, your website is going to be database driven, but your prototype, if you're just showing me what the site's going to look at, it could just be plain old static HTML. Or you could do it in ASP.NET. Remember what a prototype is meant to do. It's meant to give everyone involved sort of a preview of the general appearance and flow of the work, how the site is going to be laid out, and how the navigation is going to work, and how things are generally going to look. Prototype doesn't need to be functional. So, for example, if you have a search page on your website, all right, your search page would run out to the database based on what the user entered and retrieve entries. Well, that's how the final version of the search page is going to look. For the prototype, it might be enough just to hard code them. Make an HTML table that has sample data in it that looks like search results. So that's sufficient for a prototype. And then when you actually go and make it real, you'll actually put the real database functionality in to do that. Are there any questions about this? So, similar to the web database design, I don't make it a requirement, but I probably should, to follow all the steps that we do in the web development class. Define the goals, define the personas, define the requirements, define the layout, the structure of the site, the layout of the pages in a prototype. All right? If you want to organize your stuff that way, that would be great, although that's not an absolute requirement. Questions about what you need to do or anything about this project. And then, of course, the final version of the project is ASP.NET Razor pages that connect to a database and actually do all the things that you said it was going to do. Yes?
Can we do like a point of sale type website?
Sure. The one about that, the concern about that is it'd be too broad, so just think of ways that you can narrow that down. For example, maybe you pre-populate the tables with the items that are for sale. So you don't have to enter new items into it. That would be sufficient. That's sort of what I mean about like you're drawing the boundaries of the thing. You're going to handle stuff assuming there's already items populated, but the rest of it will work. Does anyone have any ideas? You obviously mentioned that as a potential idea. Any other people have ideas about this? Okay, the time to start thinking about it is now. All right. I will make the corrections to this, which again, I'm kind of joking. There isn't huge corrections. You know, there's just a few tweaks I need to make, and I need to change the dates. But again, we'll go. I'll make those corrections today, and I will post the revised version of this document up here today. All right. Now, on to your next assignment. Your next assignment should be straightforward because it just involves you working through a tutorial. All right? But I sort of want to give a preview to the tutorial. You know, I'm not going to do the tutorial in front of you. That's for you to do. All right? But I want to talk about the contents of the tutorial to sort of give you an idea and to sort of put it in context. So you keep these things in your mind as you're going through the tutorial, right? Because some tutorials are very mechanical. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, but you're not really thinking about like why you're doing it. All right? And this I think is a good tutorial, but I want to give my own 2 cents about the purpose why you're doing this tutorial and what each step means and so on. So let's look at that assignment. I do not like how Canvas, when I publish a module, it publishes everything inside the module. And sometimes I don't want that. Okay, here's the tutorial. We're going to create a Razor Pages web app with ASP.NET Core. All right? So here's an example of what are the pages that you're going to have when you're done. So this is actually from a database where we can search for, and it's a database for movies, where we can enter new movies, we can delete movies, and we can view the details of a movies. And we can insert a new movie. So we have all that functionality. We have CRUD. In this case, right? We have the CRUD functionality. We can create, we can retrieve, we can update, and we can delete. All right. First thing we're going to do is you're going to create a Razor Pages web app. It's what we've been doing for, I think, all of our assignments except maybe the first one. This reviews those steps. The one thing I would suggest to make your life easier is to use the names that they say in the tutorial. And the only reason I say that is later on, if they reference a name, if you said, well, I don't feel like calling it what they did, I'll call it something else, it can get confusing in the tutorial. All right, there we go. It's then asking you to examine the project files. Now, we've done that to a degree, but take some time to actually see the contents of the project files that it generates. Okay? So really up to this point it's nothing new except they're asking you to look at the contents of the files. Now we're going to add a model. All right? Add a model in the Entity Framework core. This is the mechanism that we use to manage data in a database. We create a class for a model. All right? That's a little different than the model that you get for a razor page. All right? This is a different kind of model. This represents the persistent data, the data that we're going to store. Razor pages, which we're using, is sort of a variant on the model view controller paradigm. That was one of the things that you had to write about for, I think, your first or second lab. So the model in the model view controller is handling the data. It's where the data comes from. It's where the data and business rules for a given entity live. And right now we don't have many business rules. We're just storing stuff. So it's where the data lives. It shows you how to create a data model class. And this is the class that you need to create. If you notice, it really is just a list of attributes. No real business rules, right? It's just a list of attributes for that entity. We're going to have an ID. We're going to have a title for the movie. We're going to have the date and time that it was released. We're going to have a genre, and we're going to have a price. This notation, and again, the tutorial does a good job explaining this, but this shows that for our date time field, that we don't have to enter a time. Build a project to ensure there's no compile errors. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to scaffold the movie model. All right. Scaffold, what do you think about a scaffolding in a building? It's sort of a structure that you can use to help build something else. All right? If you think of scaffolding, to go and navigate something easier and to help you build something quickly. It's going to give you a starting point so you don't have to do everything by yourself. Because if you think about it, a lot of database applications are going to have real similar functionality for certain things, right? The CRUD functionality, to be able to create, retrieve, update, and delete. That's pretty standard functionality, all right? So what they're going to do is they're going to give you a jump start. They're going to give you something that you can stand on to get to where you need to go. And that's really what a scaffold is. So we're going to build some web pages. Actually, the .NET is going to build some web pages for us that we can use as starting points, that we can build our stuff onto. And this is really cool. When I taught this class before, we did everything by hand. All right? So at this point in the course, we'd spend a week or two talking about retrieving data. We'd spend a week or two talking about inserting data. Maybe a week talking about updating data, a week talking about deletes. So to get through the CRUD functionality in previous semesters prior to ASP.NET Core, it took us maybe 4 or 5 weeks at least. I wasn't adding them up in my head, but you get the idea. Took several weeks at least. Whereas here, first tutorial out of the gate, you can create web pages that do the basic functionality for this. This describes how to do it, how to add the scaffold item. You select the model, all right? And in the drop-down for model, there'll be a list of all your models, and you'll pick the movie model. The data context class, you hit the plus and change it to this. This change is not required, however, it does it sort of in a consistent way, so they suggest you do it. Then you click Add. It's going to sit there chugging for a while. All right? It is going to actually generate for you a create, delete, details, edit, and index page. Now, are these pages going to be perfectly polished, everything that you'd ever dream of, award-winning web pages? No. But they'll have the basic functionality that later on we can go back and tweak them and change them. And again, a scaffold, something we can stand on to get to where we need to go. So it creates these pages and it updates this file. Now, when you create the model, you have not created the database. That's an important distinction. All right? Creating the model is describing what is going to be in the database, but you have not actually created the database yet. This step does it for you. And you're going to go to a Package Manager console, and I'll go and I'll open this up. All right? But it's like a command line. But it's a command line where we can enter in specific commands that will allow us to create a database. So let me go into there and show you how that works. All right, let's say we're in the middle of our tutorial. We hit Package Manager Console. That opens up a little shell window down here where we can type these commands in. And that's where you type these commands in, one at a time. This one, then this one. What you're doing effectively is you're taking your model objects and making a database out of them, right? When we described our model back here, where was it? When we described our model here, that kind of looks like a database table definition. All right? We are going to use that to create our database tables. So in this case, we're going to create a database that has one table. All right? Named movies. This name here, add-migration, is going to be the name that we're giving to, it's like a version number. Initial create. This is the first time we're creating this database. So they thought initial create would be a good name. Later on, we're going to add a table, I think. Well, yeah, you're going to add a table as part of the assignment. And you're going to change this table. And they gave a different name for the migration, like update movies or whatever. So this is a name that you're giving to this migration. Update database is going to take the models and it's going to go in and generate the database tables. All right? It's going to give you a warning, blah, 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 information, shows you what it did, and so on. When it's done, when we run the application, we navigate to there. All right? If you get this error, you missed the migration step. And you should go to an index, and from the index you should click Add or Create New, and you can go and you can create a new movie. So make sure you can do everything in that movie section. Add, insert, or add, delete, update, and so on. Spend some time looking at the pages. And how they work. Here is, for example, the index page. It's showing us where the model is for it. It is, we can almost figure out what this is doing here. It's pulling data. It's retrieving data and looping through it, and so on. We have our layout page, which we talked about before. Excuse me. You should update the layout. Remember, when you generate the layout page initially, there's like an About Us page and a privacy policy page and all that. Clean up the application so your navigation has only the stuff in it that should be in it. Only the stuff that you're making in the tutorial. So the movie section. Add, create, and so on. Spend some time looking at this again. And get a sense of how it works. After we've gone through this tutorial and you at least have a sense of how it works, we'll spend more time as a class looking at this. So probably like next Thursday, we will go in, either next Thursday or next Tuesday, we'll go in and we'll dig down and we'll study these so that we understand them. Here we're doing a database update. And we're viewing the SQL Server local database that we can pre-populate with stuff. We could go in and add data this way to seed the database. Test the app and run it. Update the pages. We can update the generated code. Remember, scaffolding doesn't mean it does all your work for you. It means it gives you something you can build on. We're adding a search capability on how that works. We're updating the database. We're adding a rating to it. and then we do another migration. Remember, we're not having a midterm, but if we were having a midterm, a good question is, what's a migration? And a migration essentially is the version of the database, an update to a new version of the database. And so you give it a name, in this case rating, because this migration we've added the rating to it. Adding validation. And that's it. Okay, after you've done the tutorial, I want you to do one more thing. All right. Let's see what the assignment says. I might actually ask you to do a couple of things. I want you to, actually I'm only asking you to do one thing. I thought I was going to ask you to develop your own CSS for those pages, but I didn't. That would be a cool thing to do though. All right? But after you've gone through the tutorial, use what you've learned to create an actor table, including actor ID, last name, first name, and birth date. Scaffold the web pages that provide CRUD. You don't have to do all the things that you did with the movie table, like adding validation and that sort of stuff. All right? But go through the process of defining a model for the actor, do a migration to update the database to include the actor table, and then scaffold to create actors pages so that you can enter in actors. Okay? Questions about this? All right. I think this is going to be the start of where we really start to have fun in this class. All right? Not that we haven't had fun so far, but we're going to have even more fun if you can even imagine that. So be ready. All right? Get a lot of rest. All right? First thing I want to do again is make sure we have handled all old business. So make sure you've turned stuff in, make sure I've graded it. All right? When you have finished all the labs that are due up to this point, I think up to lab 6, then start this tutorial and add that. It shouldn't take too long to go through this tutorial. Again, and then show that, go back and recreate an actors table to sort of show that you can take what we've learned previously by doing the movie table and apply it. All right, any questions? That's all I had today. The rest of the time you can work on your stuff. Thursday will be a work day as well. All right? Now, the other thing that you can do, this is your time. Again, the lab's your time. I made my suggestions of stuff to work on. But the other thing is start thinking of a project. So we'll probably have a few work days here. And the idea is to catch up all your stuff, get through this tutorial, and start with your project. All right, we'll see you in lab.